JPMorgan Chase is quite the controversial company. I mean, there have been scandals and lawsuits in just about every category that you would expect from a bank, and I'm talking about major stuff here, which is meaningful because most people use banks. They claim to do business with 62 million US households, which is just about half of them. Unfortunately, there's a decent chance that you have been directly affected by at least one of these controversies, and even if not, you have almost certainly been indirectly affected by them. So in this video, I'm going to talk about what's been happening. Now, I can't talk about everything because there's been a lot happening, but I do want to highlight some of the issues that have either been the most impactful, the highest profile, or the ones that have been more directly affecting the public. Starting off with their size, it's a common concern that some of these major banks have gotten too big. They have too much influence over the economy and whatnot, and that concern has never been greater than it is right here because JPMorgan Chase is the biggest bank in the United States. They have around $3 trillion in assets, which is more than Bank of America and Citigroup and every other one. This bank right here that exists today is the result of over 200 years of consolidation within the US banking industry. In fact, I don't know if any other company is as deeply rooted in American history. Just some of the highlights. Their origins can be traced to the Manhattan Company that was founded in 1799 by Aaron Burr. It was originally set up to build a system that would supply clean water to New York City, but when they ended up with some extra money, they voted to use it to start a bank. Though it appears that may have been Aaron Burr's true motive in the first place. After only 9 years, they sold their entire water business to the city, and then from that point, they were all about banking. In 1955, that company merged with the third largest bank in the country called Chase National Bank. They had started back in 1877 and were actually named in honor of Salmon P. Chase, who had died 4 years earlier. He was the Secretary of the Treasury during the Civil War under President Abraham Lincoln and went on to serve as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court for the final 9 years of his life. Also, I thought it was interesting that later on, he was chosen to be the guy on the $10,000 bill that was official US currency. Anyway, Chase National Bank started merging with a bunch of other banks in the 1920s, and as I said, ultimately came together with the Manhattan Company in the 1950s. The other part of the name, obviously, comes from JP Morgan, another historical figure. Now, he could easily derail this whole video. Get it? Derail? But to keep it simple, in the 1890s, he inherited his father's business and combined that with his own stuff to officially start this new company that I'm talking about here. Alright, it's all coming together. Throughout the 1900s, JP Morgan and Chase were two separate banks that continued to grow and merge with a bunch of other banks. By the year 2000, the two of them merged together to create JP Morgan Chase, and even that's not the end of it. They went on to merge with even more banks, helping them grow into the largest bank in the country. Notably, they acquired Bank One in 2004, and then Bear Stearns and Washington Mutual in 2008. That was all connected to the financial crisis, by the way, where they were essentially deemed too big to fail by the US government and bailed out with $12 billion. A controversial move that further cemented the concern of many people that JPMorgan Chase may have grown a little bit too big. For the rest of my list, I've chosen not to talk about anything that happened before that 2000 merger that essentially created JPMorgan Chase, partially to keep things more modern and relevant, but also just to help narrow it down. So next on the list is their involvement with fraud, because JPMorgan Chase has been involved with some of the biggest all-time accounting scandals, namely Enron and WorldCom exposed in the early 2000s. I've talked about them before, but these companies essentially lied on their financial statements with the goal of tricking the public into investing in their company. For Enron, JPMorgan Chase was accused of helping them lie to the investors. They were one of Enron's biggest lenders, and they allegedly loaned them money in these shady agreements that miscategorized the loans in a way that hid them from investors. So the potential investor would come along, see those low debt numbers on the financial statements, and invest their money in the company because of it. Well, when the company went bankrupt, those investors lost their money and then sued JPMorgan Chase, along with many others, I should make that clear. But in this case, it ended in 2005 with a $2.2 billion settlement. For the WorldCom scandal, there were similar accounting issues happening at the time that JPMorgan Chase was helping them sell their bonds to the public. In that lawsuit, it was claimed claim that they didn't conduct enough research on WorldCom before agreeing to sell those bonds, because if they had, they would have caught on to this accounting fraud. That one also ended in 2005 with a similar $2 billion settlement. Another fraud that they were connected to was the Ponzi scheme from Bernie Madoff. I've talked about this one before as well, but he was tricking people into investing their money with him, and for 20 years he was moving that money around primarily through accounts with JPMorgan Chase. The bank was accused of knowing what was happening and choosing to ignore it. In 2011, even Bernie Madoff himself said there were people at the bank who knew what was going on. He was scamming all these people. It seems like the bank knew about it and they just continued to work with him. In 2014, JPMorgan Chase agreed to pay $2.6 billion to the US government and to the victims of the fraud. I think you'll agree that these are big, high-profile cases, and JPMorgan Chase paid a multi-billion-dollar settlement in every one of them. The next controversy is their potential involvement with the LIBOR manipulation, probably more impactful than anything else on this list. Those letters stand for London Interbank Offered Rate. It's like a benchmark that's used to set interest rates. Like if you're taking out a loan or getting a mortgage, the interest rate that you're charged is determined using this index. The issue here is that the number itself is calculated using information provided by the banks based on rates at which they lend money to each other. The scandal is that these banks were allegedly working together to provide misinformation that would artificially alter that rate in a way that would be favorable to them. JPMorgan Chase is believed to be one of the 5 major banks involved in it. I know that was a lot right there. To put it simple, JPMorgan Chase and these other banks were potentially altering the interest rates from 2003 until it was exposed in 2012. I say it was the most impactful because anyone who took out a loan during that time was likely affected by it through that interest rate on the loan, and therefore the interest that they eventually paid. And this one also led to a lawsuit that was settled along with Citigroup for $182 million. Next up is mortgages. They have been involved in so many scandals involving mortgages, the biggest of which were part of the infamous housing bubble and subsequent financial crisis in the later 2000s. There were many banks involved, but JPMorgan Chase was right there with them. They were providing risky mortgages where the person had a decent chance of not being able to pay it, and then bundling those mortgages together into securities, finding potential investors, and misleading them to believe that the mortgages in those securities were much more stable than they actually were, and then selling those securities. It's been covered many times before. In 2012, there was this massive $26 billion settlement related to it, where JPMorgan Chase was one of 5 banks that agreed to pay that amount. Then, in the following year, there was a $13 billion settlement specific to JPMorgan Chase, which was actually the largest settlement with a single entity in American history. Other mortgage issues outside of the financial crisis that I want to mention include overcharging 6,000 active duty military members for their mortgages and wrongfully foreclosing on 14 of them. That led to a multi-million-dollar settlement in 2011. In 2017, they were accused of charging black and Hispanic people higher rates on their mortgages when compared to white people. They denied it ever happened, but it also ended in a multi-million-dollar settlement. I wasn't kidding when I said that they have been involved in a lot of lawsuits. I'm gonna keep things moving here and talk about the London whale. It's not an actual whale. It's a gambling term used to describe someone who makes really large bets. And in this case, the whale is a guy from London named Bruno Ixil. He was a trader for JPMorgan Chase that made some absurdly risky bets for the company involving credit default swaps. The specifics of it get a little complicated, but those bets ultimately lost the company around $6 billion. Not many gamblers out there can say that they lost $6 billion. It not only lost them money, it hurt their reputation because it made the public doubt their control over risks. The management of the company was mostly held responsible for letting it happen. The CEO of the company took a big pay cut the following year that was likely decided based on this. And on top of everything else, there was almost $1 billion in fines attached to it. To summarize, that is $6 billion in losses, $1 billion in fines, and a hurt reputation. The list continues with all of the controversies they've had involving credit cards. Again, it's just about every issue that you can imagine here. In 2012, they were sued by a bunch of their customers who claimed that the bank unjustly increased their monthly minimum payments from 2% to 5% of their balance. They said that they were told if they transferred the balances from their other credit cards to their Chase card that they would be given fixed rates until the balance was paid off. So they raised the rates out of nowhere. It led to more fees. Kind of a weird case, but it ended in a $100 million settlement. And then from 2005 to 2012, there was a separate issue with billing. The bank automatically was charging cardholders for credit monitoring services that they never agreed to, and in many cases, they never even provided the service. That was the accusation anyway, and in 2013, they were ordered to refund $300 million to customers and pay $80 million in fines. In 2015, there was another issue, this time a affecting over 100,000 cardholders. They were essentially using all of these illegal methods to try and collect their debts, and you won't be surprised to hear that it also ended in a multi-million-dollar settlement. Finally, because this was a pretty big recent case, I want to include the manipulation of futures. Futures are financial derivatives. In this case, they're mainly for precious metals. It gets complicated again, but JPMorgan Chase was allegedly manipulating the price of them. They were placing these orders that they never intended to execute to either raise or lower the demand for them, depending on the situation, which of course would either raise or lower the price. In 2020, they admitted to the wrongdoing and agreed to pay a $920 million penalty. So there you have it. That's my list of some of the more significant or interesting controversies that have come from JPMorgan Chase since their formation in the year 2000. Let me know in the comments, what has been your experience with JPMorgan Chase? Do you have some kind of an account with them, or did you in the past? And if so, were you involved in any of these scandals? Were you active duty military that was overcharged for your mortgage? Did they try to enroll you in their credit monitoring services? Were you an investor in Enron? There is such a variety here, so I think that's a fair question. Also, I feel the need to point out one more time that this list is not complete. There are dozens of other controversies that could have easily made it. There's been so much going on with this company. Let me know if there's anything else that you feel I should have included, and any other thoughts that you have about JPMorgan Chase, leave them in the comments. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Thank you for watching.